This new story about survival during the apocalypse begins like many others, with betrayal. The main character of this story is named Zhang Xiaoyang, and now he is in a hanging state, literally. He's hanging right above a cage full of bloodthirsty zombies, and his ex-girlfriend is laughing and mocking him, reminding that all his friends are dead. But he may not worry. Soon his meaningless life will also end and he can join his friends. Thinking back on what happened, Xiaoyang couldn't forgive himself for letting it all happen. It was all his fault. Or rather, it was his fault for trusting this evil woman who deserved a miserable death. That's who the real villain here is. But for her, all the threats of our hero were not scary at all. She found herself a boyfriend stronger and richer and now asked him to deal with this garbage. The fat man was not at all against helping and offered to torture Zhang Xiaoyang slowly, so that the girl could enjoy the sight and let out her anger. Before pressing the button, the fat man mockingly thanked Xiaoyang for all his supplies. Thanks to his generosity, they would be able to live comfortably for a few months. That was the end of the conversation, and Xiaoyang fell right into the zombie cage. For these insane creatures, there was no difference in what to attack. Fresh flesh was the only thing they desired in this world. The bound Xiaoyang could only scream in pain, and dreamed that if he had a second chance to live his life again, he would make his ex-girlfriend Kui Jing and fatty Li Shuxiang pay for what they had done. But suddenly, it was as if Xiaoyang woke up and heard Kui Jing's nasty, disgusting voice demanding an explanation. She wanted to know why it was that he still hadn't put her name on the house deeds. Does he not love her at all? Xiaoyang, meanwhile, was trying to come to his senses and realize what was going on. Had he been reborn in the time before the apocalypse? In his past life, he was deceived by Kui Jing. Not only did she swindle away the inheritance his parents left him, but he also ended up homeless. Later, the apocalypse began, and a global catastrophe turned people into zombies, plunging the entire world into chaos. But even in the midst of this chaos, Xiaoyang was not confused, and with the help of friends managed to survive and after some wandering built a safe zone. In it they could not be afraid of zombies, and thanks to good supplies they could live there for months. That's when Kui Jing appeared again. She pretended to be a desperate person who was looking for shelter, and she won Xiaoyang's sympathy again. Yes, it was stupid, and he realized it himself now. The very next night, she opened the gates of the safe zone to the enemies who had long dreamed of destroying them. Now, this same traitorous woman was not calming down and demanded 400,000 yuan bride price in addition to the house if he wanted to marry her. She behaved the same as always, confident that Xiaoyang was enchanted by her beauty and couldn't see her rotten character. But this time it will be different. He won't let this evil thing twist him around. However, he needs to act carefully. Being overly impulsive could hurt him now. Kui Jing gave him a week's time to do what she demanded, otherwise the wedding would be cancelled. At this, Xiaoyang threw her out of the house and assured her that he understood. Kui Jing was not used to such an attitude and couldn't understand what was going on. Since when had her slave Xiaoyang become so assertive? Had he changed his mind about being her servant? Now that he was rid of that annoying traitor, he could look around. There was only a month left before the apocalypse began, and Xiaoyang had to start preparing immediately, or else it would be too late later. Suddenly, he received a notification like in some kind of game. He received a system mission after activating the apocalypse system. The mission had a very common name, Apocalypse Preparation. To complete it, he needed to own a piece of land and prepare a year's stock of supplies. For completing it, Xiaoyang could get 10 points, which he could exchange for rewards in the system store. Our hero was pleasantly surprised by such a bonus. The system, missions, and rewards for their completion. What else is needed for happiness? Just what could be bought in the system store Xiaoyang did not know. Mostly there were loot boxes and some potions, for example, to improve physical strength. But from all this, our hero was distracted by his stomach grumbling and demanding a proper meal. Xiaoyang had almost forgotten how in his previous life, he was skimping and saving every penny to gather Kui Jing's bride price, which left him malnourished. Now he was not going to limit himself and decided to have a fancy dinner delivered. In a month's time, zombies would be everywhere, and as long as good food is available, he should take advantage of it. A few hours later, the delivery arrived. Xiaoyang would never have allowed himself such a legendary Michelin 3-star takeaway before. He decided to start by tasting what a 300 yuan braised pork tasted like. After what he ate during the apocalypse, it was divine and just too good to be true. Our hero didn't stop there and went into food devourer mode. His appetite was quite good and soon he was almost done. Just at this moment, the phone rang. Wen Shuya, Kui Jing's friend, was calling, which meant that she had already managed to complain to her. Xiaoyang answered the phone and immediately regretted it. A shout immediately came from the phone, Wen Shuya demanding to explain how dare he treat Kui Jing like that. She just wanted him to prove his love. If he can't give her his property, then how can he say he loves her? Actually, Kui Jing was just testing him a little and he failed the test. But if he brings the house deeds and 1,000,000 yuan in cash as an apology, Then Wen Shuya will try to help him convince Kui Jing that it was just a misunderstanding. If he doesn't, he can expect a breakup. After such a long speech, our hero simply ran out of patience. Who does she think she is to test him? With an attitude like that, she should just get lost. Wen Shuya still tried to object, but Xiaoyang just ended the call. He was already fed up with these money-hungry girls. He didn't care about them now. The most important thing was to find and buy a suitable piece of land. There he could build the strongest fortress, which would not only be easy to defend, but also close to a source of water and forest. The next morning, he arrived at the real estate agency. He was immediately greeted by a consultant and asked if he had come to rent or buy a house. Xiaoyang assured her that it was neither. He was here for something more valuable. Suddenly, a real estate sales manager came up behind them and ordered the consultant Xiao Ning to go and help carry the boxes. They received a big shipment of toilet paper today. She tried to explain that she had a customer, but it was no use. Manager Zhu didn't see Xiaoyang as a customer at all. He even scolded his subordinate for forgetting everything he taught her. Convinced that you can't be a real estate agent without flair, he sent her to work in the backyard and told our hero that such a broke loser in cheap clothes probably cannot even afford to buy a toilet, so he can't even be called a customer. This arrogant attitude annoyed our hero, and he was going to teach this manager a lesson. To start with, Xiaoyang asked him to repeat what he just said and explain how dare he look down on the others. Manager Zhu was not going to back down. Confident in his power, he proudly declared that he was a man who looks down on dogs like our hero. If Xiaoyang could buy himself at least a toilet, he would eat shit on livestream. One look at Xiaoyang was enough to realize that the manager would soon regret about his words. Well, since the manager said so himself, Xiaoyang advised him to make sure he would find some fresh, steaming ones later. After all, our hero didn't come here today to rent or sell a house, but to buy land. All the customers around him were shocked. It was the first time they had seen someone rich enough to buy land. In that case, Ms. Xiao Ning invited him to sit down so she could give him a detailed introduction. Manager Zhu watched all this with gritted teeth, confident that anyone could talk. But when it came to payment, he didn't believe that Xiaoyang would be able to pay. Xiao Ning provided our hero all the pieces of land available for purchase. He could view them while she would explain everything. But for our hero, none of that was necessary. He knew exactly what he wanted. Xiaoyang was going to name his requirements and let her see if they had anything suitable. Xiaoyang wanted the land to be near mountains and water, preferably with running water. It would be ideal to have factories or large buildings on the land. To find something suitable, Xiao Ning needed a little time. But then Manager Zhu came from behind again. He seemed to have a hobby of approaching from behind. He thought that the piece of land that fit all the requirements is located in the Eastern District. Xiao Ning thought it was a bad idea. That place was the Tea City land. There were many unfinished factories and pending projects there. Such property couldn't be sold to customers. Manager Zhu didn't think so. He still hadn't seen any customers here. And this loser with such high demands in his opinion was not here to buy land, but to make trouble. Xiaoyang didn't really care where the land was located, as long as it met his requirements. Incomplete factories were also not a problem, even on the contrary, an advantage. After looking at the details, our hero decided that it was exactly what he needed. With the barbed wire, this place would be easy to defend, and unfinished factories would save a lot of money and time on construction. So he agreed to buy this land. He was ready to sign the contract now and pay for the purchase. Xiao Ning was shocked. She couldn't believe that someone in his right mind was going to buy this land with unfinished factories. But still, Xiaoyang stood firm and even asked her to do it quickly because someone here couldn't wait to eat fresh poop. Soon enough, Manager Zhu held the check in his hands and couldn't believe it was possible. This ragamuffin was able to pay 300,000 wen for a land with abandoned factories. This was just crazy to him. Xiaoyang reminded him before he left that he had made the payment, and now it was his turn to perform. While Zhu is enjoying the process, Xiaoyang will send him a donation in Super Chat so that he won't be so offended. The other customers started encouraging the fat manager to hurry up because they had already started the stream. One just had a stomach that didn't feel good, but he promised that it would at least be fresh. Thus, Xiaoyang had completed the first step of the system task. Now it was time to get to the second one. Xiaoyang had spent all the money to buy the land, and now he needed to figure out how to get money to accumulate supplies. When he was leaving the real estate agency, he was recognized by an old acquaintance, Li Shuxiang, and he immediately wondered what our hero was doing here. However, all these questions flew out of his head when he saw what was going on inside. The staff and customers were forcing Manager Zhu to keep his promise while he was desperately asking for help and how much he didn't want to eat poop. Meanwhile, Kui Jing was painting her nails and enjoying life carefree. She got a call from Li Shuxiang and asked if she knew that Xiaoyang had come to the real estate company to buy land. Of course she didn't know, and was shocked at where he got so much money from. Li Shuxiang clarified that Xiaoyang had paid 300,000 yuan. probably the bride price money he saved. Now she was just furious that that bastard dared to use her money. Li Shuqiang advised her to calm down and not get mad, but rather go find Xiaoyang and ask him what was going on. But she was blinded by anger. She wasn't going to ask him anything. That bastard was using her money and she was going to expose him today. In the meantime, our hero had his own worries. Buying supplies and building a base required a lot of money to be found. All his peaceful musings were interrupted by a frantic knock on the door. It was Jing along with her sister. She was still furious that he dared to spend her money. Xiaoyang still couldn't understand what she was talking about. Jing, on the other hand, continued as she thought to expose him that he used the bride price money to buy land. That money belonged to her, and since he bought the land with it, it also belonged to her. Xiaoyang didn't even know how to respond to this crazy woman's claims. He finally decided to explain things to her in a way that even a dumbass like her would understand. He has a lot of money, but he's not going to spend a single cent on her. Besides, he knows about her affairs with Li Shuqiang. Jing didn't understand what was going on and how he even knew about her and Li Shuqiang. Her sister, seeing where things were going, suggested to everyone to calm down and solve this little misunderstanding between a couple. But Xiaoyang was not going to waste his precious time on these two. There is no misunderstanding here. Jing is not his girlfriend, but a pathetic doormat of that old fatty Li Shuqiang. Right after that, he slammed the door in her face and told her to get lost. Just looking at her already annoys him. Jing still couldn't understand how he knew. She and Li Shuqiang had always been very careful when renting rooms. Her sister didn't know about them either, and didn't understand why her sister didn't share such important information with her up front. Is she really dating that middle-aged man? Jing assured that it was nothing serious. They had just rented rooms a few times. In such an out-of-control situation, they had no choice but to go home and come up with a new plan. That's all they could do. Since her sister screwed up with Xiaoyang, Wen Shuya herself was now not going to hold back and wanted to charm Xiaoyang. After all, they are good sisters. The next day, Xiaoyang arrived on his land together with a construction crew. He wanted to rebuild one factory, and he was wondering how long it would take. After a detailed analysis, Foreman Li summarized that reinforcing the walls, building protective towers, installing Texas barbed wire, thickening the steel armored doors, and adding bulletproof glass were all time-consuming processes. But he was interested in one additional question. What kind of power had offended our hero that he needed to build such a fortress? Xiaoyang advised him not to ask too much because knowing too much does not lead to anything good. Our hero just wanted to know how much it would cost to finish the construction in a month. Foreman assured him that it couldn't be done in a month. In that case, Xiaoyang knew many who were willing to do it instead. Foreman replied that the lives and well-being of the workers were worth more. This surprised our hero. He had first met Foreman with conscience, but it turned out that he was wrong. It just meant that there would be a lot of money needed. Xiaoyang asked him to tell him the price without delay. Foreman Li calculated that if they had to finish the project in a month, the workers would have to work around the clock, so the cost would be 6 digits. The price was 20 million, and they wanted to get a deposit of 5 million yuan before they started construction, so they could start work right away. But this option was not quite suitable for our hero. He wanted them to start work right away, and he would transfer the money to them within a week. The construction company didn't have to worry that he wouldn't pay. If he couldn't, that land would be theirs. Suddenly, Wen Shuya appeared on the construction site. She defiantly hugged his arm and asked him what he was doing here. Xiaoyang was already sick of this rotten woman. In his previous life, she, along with Jing, had forced him out of his parents' legacy. And this time, he was willing to make her pay twice as much. All her attempts were useless. No matter how much she tried to act like a nice girl, he could see her rotten nature. She asked if this was the land he bought. It's such a beautiful view, and Xiaoyang probably wants to build a villa here, right? But whatever he builds here is none of her business. Seeing this attitude, she couldn't understand what was going on. Since when did that loser behave so strangely? Usually just her touch on his arm was enough to make him blush and his heart start pounding. But today, none of that worked. Instead, he indifferently turned away from her and went to instruct the construction workers what they were doing wrong, and that the gate needed to be widened. Wen Shuya couldn't afford to miss such a golden opportunity. Since Jing had ruined everything with her cheating, she should move her, and this land would become hers. Xiaoyang returned home and wondered how he could get more money. After he mortgaged the house to the bank, he only got a 3 million yuan loan. It wasn't enough to cover the cost of even the first phase of construction. Although if you thought about it that way, the apocalypse was inevitable anyway, and if he sold the house to a few people, it wouldn't matter. It was something that needed to be dealt with. Just in time, there was a knock on the door. It was the damn annoying old man neighbor. He lived downstairs, and his name was Grandpa Li. He was a rich old bastard. He owned the apartments on the first and second floor and wanted to buy the third floor too, but Xiaoyang wouldn't agree to sell it. So this old man was doing all sorts of nasty things, painting the doors, scattering trash, bringing coffin and jamming lock to the doors. He's been up to all kinds of dirty tricks, and now he's come to complain that Xiaoyang made noise last night by having a party here. Of course it was a deliberate lie. Our hero went to bed early last night and didn't do anything like that. But there was no point in arguing further. Xiaoyang knew that the old man wanted his house, so he pretended that he was fed up and gave up. Now he was ready to sell the house to the old man. The old geezer couldn't believe his ears. But Xiaoyang had a condition. He wanted to stay living in the house for another 6 months until he found a new place to live. But the old man must transfer 5 million into his account right now so he could pay the deposit for the new house. If the old man doesn't agree to this condition, he can forget about the deal. The greedy old bastard couldn't let that slip away and agreed, but demanded to sign the contract so that Xiaoyang couldn't change his mind later. This was no problem for our hero. That old bastard would still die in his house when the apocalypse started. Once old Li transferred 5 million yuan, then in sum with the loan from the bank, Xiaoyang had collected 8 million. Now it's time to complete the second task and get the reward. The biggest supermarket was perfect for this task. Xiaoyang began to diligently stock up on supplies for the year ahead. People around him looked at him as a mentally unstable guy and preferred to stay away. Finally, he dragged a whole bunch of grocery carts to the checkout line. People around him still didn't understand why he was buying so much stuff. They just laughed at him like he was just another fool who believed in rumors about the apocalypse and the end of the world. But their conversations didn't mean anything. The most important thing was that Xiaoyang had completed the system's task and received 10 points. Among all the options available in the system store, the protagonist's supply box was worth 10 points. And Xiaoyang didn't hesitate to use this opportunity and decided to spend all the available points on this box. The purchase was successful, and he received this mysterious box. After opening it, he received a level 1 space ring that allowed him to use his own subspace of 500 cubic meters. Also inside this space, time stood still, allowing the items inside to not spoil. This was an incredibly successful gain. There was a reason why our hero had a good feeling about this box. The fact that the time inside the subspace stood still meant that he could even store fresh food inside and it would never spoil. Along with the new item, Xiaoyang also received a new mission, 10 years of sustenance. For its completion, it was possible to get 20 points. But suddenly our hero was called by the supermarket security chief. He'd gotten word that some crazy guy was causing trouble. Turns out he knew Xiaoyang. The security chief's name was Yang Tao. He went to the same high school as our hero and was the lackey of a local bully who bullied the weak and feared the strong. In the past, he had extorted money from high school students for his boss, and Xiaoyang had frequent conflicts with him. Today, Xiaoyang didn't expect to run into him here. Yang Tao demanded that our hero put all these things back where he got them from, otherwise he would not be kind to him. Xiaoyang replied that he still hadn't changed and was still bullying the weak. But our hero was not going to return anything. He is a customer here, and he is always right. Is this really how customers are treated? Then Yang Tao demanded that Xiaoyang pay for the items right now, otherwise it would be his own fault for being cruel. After an hour, all the cashiers in the supermarket finally calculated the price of all the items. A total of 56,000 yuan. Yang Tao immediately demanded to pay, and our hero did not hesitate to use his credit card as a superhero weapon. The transaction was successful, and the security chief was shocked. He turned around and was about to leave, accepting his defeat, but Xiaoyang ordered him to wait. Yang Tao didn't realize what he was doing, but it was simple. Yang Tao had been rude, and now our hero wanted a public apology, or else he would return all those goods. The security chief thought that he had gone too far and was only looking for trouble. However, there were too many witnesses around. They saw everything and fully supported our hero. They recorded everything on video and threatened Yang Tao to make him famous all over the internet if he didn't apologize. Xiaoyang also promised that if the apology was sincere enough, he would buy the goods here 10 times more. If Yang Tao didn't believe him, then he could bring the POS machine and our hero would show him his balance. Yang Tao couldn't believe it when he saw 7 million in the account. Xiaoyang only demanded to apologize, and then he would continue buying. While the security chief struggled with his pride, this battle was short-lived and he lost. The pressure was too high and he gave up and apologized. Passing by, Xiaoyang advised him not to be so thoughtless in the future because you never know how the situation will turn out. Now Yang Tao put on a mask of benevolence and asked why our hero buys so many things. Of course, Xiaoyang replied it was none of his business. He was planning a big deal. In that case, Yang Tao knew what to offer. The items in this supermarket's warehouse were not enough. If Xiaoyang wanted to make a big deal, he should have found a wholesaler. And he just knew one since he worked at the supermarket. It was Zhang Shengzhe. He was currently in the wholesale business. He immediately called him and happily told him that he had found a big customer for him. Xiaoyang realized that some people never change, and since these two bullies still worked together, he He could only wonder how much they were ripping off the supermarket. Soon they arrived at the wholesale warehouse together. An expensive car drove up to them rather carelessly. From the way Zhang Shengji drove arrogantly, our hero realized that he had probably never been scammed before, and it was time to fix that. It was a meeting of old friends, although the arrogant boss didn't recognize our hero right away, and Tao had to remind that they once went to middle and high school together. Even so, Shengji had a hard time remembering who Xiaoyong was at first, but after thinking for a while he finally remembered. It was exactly that guy with a bit of a backbone. Shengji took one look at his former classmate. He didn't like the cheap non-designer clothes at all. He despised people who pretended to be rich when they weren't. Shengji had already made a conclusion about our hero based on his clothes. He immediately turned to Tao to teach this idiot a lesson for bringing him such a useless big client and wasting his time. Shengji even gave him a kick in the ass to think better next time, even though Tao tried to stand his ground, knowing that Xiaoyong was actually rich. Shengji couldn't even allow such a thought. He had been in this business for years, and as he thought he could tell at a glance who was rich and who wasn't. Xiaoyong saw that some people never change and called Shengji an illiterate who looks down on people. Shengji immediately grabbed him and demanded him to repeat what he just said. Xiaoyong was absolutely not afraid of him, and repeated to his face that he looked down on people. But it turned out that it was not this that offended him at all, but the fact that our hero called him illiterate. This was not what Xiaoyong had expected. It turned out that this bastard was really shameless. Tao, seeing the impending fight, hurriedly intervened and advised our hero not to touch Shengji's sore point. He is really illiterate, so he hates to be called like that. But for saying that, Tao received another kick and insults from Shengji, who was angry because he was not allowed to do what he wanted. Turning to our hero, Shengji gave him a condition. Either Xiaoyong buys a truckload of goods from him or crawl back on all fours. Our hero was more than satisfied with this. He ordered Shengji to let go of his collar and call out the account number. In just a moment, the angry expression on Shengji's face changed to a shocked one. Xiaoyong had somehow actually transferred $1 million into his account. According to our hero, it was only a deposit. He had plans to buy 5 million worth of goods. Shengji asked what kind of goods he needed. Xiaoyong replied that he needed oil, rice, salt, snacks, and drinks. Simply put, the products that didn't spoil for a long time. An imperceptible smile appeared on Shengji's face. He had just received a batch of almost expired food, and this was the perfect opportunity to slip it to Xiaoyong. Upon arriving at the warehouse with the food, Shengji offered our hero to pick up the entire shipment at a discount of 10% off the original wholesale price. The offer was great. However, Xiaoyong realized that Shengji wouldn't sell him food at such a cheap price so simply. So the first thing he decided to do was to check the quality of the food. As Xiaoyong suspected, it was a trap. Although the packaging looked new, the food was almost expired. Shengji didn't expect Xiaoyong to figure out his plan so quickly. He immediately offered him a discount of as much as 50%. But our hero wasn't satisfied with this deal. With this 5 million, he intended to buy the highest quality food. However, he had plans for this expired product as well. Xiaoyong told Shengji that he was willing to take the expired goods from him for half the price, but with the condition that the payment would be made in a month. Shengji was incredulous at our hero's words, but Xiaoyong replied that he would pledge his house. Shengji was confused because he didn't understand why Xiaoyong needed the expired food. He couldn't even suspect that after a while, even this expired food would be worth its weight in gold. Xiaoyong didn't intend to go into details and told Shengji to deliver the goods to him at the right address. Suddenly, someone called to our hero regarding the sale of a house. Quickly saying goodbye to Shengji and Tao, he left. The buyer was an old man who was ready to pay 400,000 down payment and give Xiaoyong 3 months to move out. Everything was going so well that it made our hero a little wary. He asked the old man why he was in such a hurry. He replied that his granddaughter was about to change schools and she needed a place to live. Xiaoyong was the only one selling the house in the neighborhood. The old man was so honest that he gave Xiaoyong all the information himself. Our hero asked if he was afraid that with this information, he might raise the price. The old man realized his mistake, and in a panic began to beg our hero not to do this, as it was all his savings. Xiaoyong was not a scumbag who took advantage of innocent people's kindness. He replied that their deal was on, then signed the contract. The old man was incredibly happy, for now his granddaughter had a place to live. He was so kind and polite that he even apologized to Xiaoyong for distracting him from his work. Realizing how kind and honest the old man was, our hero felt that he and his granddaughter would not last a month in the apocalypse. Calling out to the old man who was already leaving, he asked him for his address. After a while, Xiaoyong arrived at his own land, where work was in full swing. After telling the foreman that the payment would be transferred soon, he inquired about the progress. As it turned out, almost 80% of the construction had been completed. The protection and thickness of the walls and doors were just as he had requested. The warehouse was based on the factory. There, everything was ready, and the warehouse could be used. This was great news. Xiaoyang immediately called Shengzhe and told him to bring the supplies. Soon the warehouse, more like a doomsday vault, began to fill up with resources. Under Xiaoyang's strict command, everything was ready by evening. As soon as the workers left, our hero could finally evaluate the work done. Everything had gone according to his plan, and now he could exhale. At the same time, the system sent a notification that he had successfully completed the task, for which he received 20 system points. When Xiaoyang opened the system store, he saw that there was a new box with awakened abilities in it. This meant that he could obtain supernatural abilities before the apocalypse began. Xiaoyang bought one box without a second thought. When he opened the box, he obtained a level 1 ability called Mind's Eye, thanks to which he could detect the hostility of the target. Xiaoyang was glad, because in his opinion, this was one of the most useful skills in the early stages of the apocalypse. The system didn't seem to want our hero to relax, as it soon sent him another task. This time he needed to obtain weapons. Lots of weapons. Xiaoyang didn't mind at all, as that was exactly what he intended to do. It was time to get some guns. With the new task at hand to arm himself for the upcoming apocalypse, Jiang Xiaoyang found himself in the seedy underbelly of the city, the busy late-night black market. Walking around, he could hear the incessant haggling and obnoxious noises of customers and sellers trying to get better deals for themselves. There were scammers everywhere. Suddenly, something caught our MC's attention. Something he saw out of the corner of his eye. It was a man familiar to him, the man that Kui Jing was clinging to in the first apocalypse, Li Shuxiang. He was aggressively trying to bring down the price of some fake jewelry, eventually whittling down the seller to agree. Jiang Xiaoyang was not expecting to run into this guy tonight, but it made sense that the bastard would be trolling for fake jade bracelets. That witch, Kui Jing, was actually dumb enough to be tricked by fake gifts. A few feet away, he finally found a stall selling some promising wares. Sharp blades were lined up on the floor, each one more lethal than the last. As soon as he laid eyes on those sharp blades, a smile crept up on his face. He finally found what he was looking for. Squatting down in front of the seller, he boldly asked if they sold any hard stuff at this stall. Mr. Camouflage, who looked like a military man, wasn't amused by any of his cryptic messaging. The dude threw him a knife sharpener, telling the young man to grind the blades himself for something harder. Growing more serious, he commented that none of these knives were hard enough. What he was looking for was something a lot tougher. Realizing what he was implying, Mr. Camo turned deathly serious and asked if he was asking for trouble. Mr. Camo's irritation was interrupted by the sound of his phone notification that 200,000 yuan had been transferred into his bank account. In front of him was Jiang Xiaoyang, holding up the receipt after he sent the astronomical funds through the QR code at the stall. This was his way of pacifying the irate seller and proving that he was a serious buyer. Finally convinced, Mr. Camo called one of his men to come and watch the stall while he handled real business. His attitude towards Jiang Xiaoyang made a 180-degree turn as he politely led the young man to another building, as talking outside could be a little inconvenient. They did not have any problems entering the innocuous building next to the store. Mr. Camo was now trying to sell Xiaoyang some homemade guns for small targets. They cost 2,000 yuan, and ammo would come cheap. Our boy immediately declined. That stoked Mr. Camo's competitive spirit a little bit. So, he busted out some replica revolvers modeled after active-duty handguns. For 5,000 yuan, you'd get a 9mm shooter. Bullets would be 5 yuan a pop. For Xiaoyang, this much was barely acceptable, but he prepaid 200,000 yuan. This junk did not stoke his interest at all. Confused by the mention of prepayment, Mr. Camo asked what he meant by it. Jiang Xiaoyang proclaimed that the initial transfer from earlier was just a 10% prepayment for his order of 2 million yuan worth of weaponry. Mr. Camo was getting a little worried regarding this mysterious buyer's affiliation. Xiaoyang made up some BS about how his subordinates usually handle this type of sleazy buys, but he's here now and doesn't appreciate unwelcomed questions regarding his identity. Sensing that the young man must mean some serious business, Mr. Camo respectfully urged him to wait just a moment while frantically running to a different room. He hurriedly turned the lock on the entrance. Just to be safe, Mr. Camo also gave the surrounding area a quick look around through the window. He turned to Jiang Xiaoyang and claimed that he came to the right person. Walking closer, he whispered that he'd handle this matter. All he needed was an address, and they'd proceed with the transaction at midnight the day after tomorrow. He'd only accept cash. By the time Jiang Xiaoyang exited the innocuous place, Mr. Camo was practically treating him like a VIP. Xiaoyang was just unlucky enough to get back to the night market street right when the familiar bastard from earlier was walking around. Li Shuxiang commented on this unexpected meeting in a black market, no less. Now it makes sense why the young man has been spending so much lately. There's also the matter of Kui Jing. He reckoned that the kid must have seen too much financial advice lately, and now he's trying to lie flat, sell everything, and live in comfort. Unbothered by all the nonsensical words of a fat bastard, Zhang Xiaoyang thought it would be more practical to just try out his newly acquired ability. Opening his mind's eye, an imperceptible aura lit up his gaze. He could see a happy face indicator on top of Mr. Camo's head and an angry one on Li Shuxiang's. This was a very useful ability, as he had expected. To experiment more, he talked trash about the fat bastard buying fake and secondhand goods to trick Kui Jing. That girl was also his secondhand trash, so it made sense that she was only worth so much. Hearing that made the fat bastard's indicator even angrier as he cursed out the young man after hitting a nerve. Seeing the developing conflict, Mr. Camo stepped in and asked his new big fish client if the fuming fat bastard was bothering Xiaoyang. He labeled Li Shuxiang as an enemy. Taking the hint, Mr. Camo assured his new big bro that he and his staff would teach the fat bastard a lesson. Xiaoyang was cool with that, but he reminded them not to go too far as he had other plans for Li Shuxiang in the future. Seeing a group of well-built thugs coming after his fat ass, the wannabe gangster started freaking out, stumbling over his words and losing his arrogance. Mr. Camo did not waste any more words on the piece of trash and pulled out a baton. The boys made quick work of the fat bastard, leaving him beaten and bruised in the middle of the dark road. There were shoe prints all over his face and his white suit from all the kicking he endured. This event only strengthened his distaste for Zhang Xiaoyang. 2 days later, the rendezvous was set at the warehouse, and it seemed like both parties were on time for the agreement. In front of Xiaoyang was a truckload of suspicious crates. This was precisely what he wanted. The arrival of his firearm signaled the success of his battle-ready task, rewarding him with 10 system points, bringing his total up to 20. Inside the crates were heavy firearms, rifles, pistols, and every extra piece of equipment he might need. For some reason, the system also added a bonus reward, a +2 physical enhancement potion. Holding the syringe in his hand, he was pretty pleased with the unexpected drop of this bonus. With the +2 classification, it was even double the efficacy of the one in the system store. Not wasting another second, he lifted that syringe and aimed at his veins. He was expecting a tiny pinch of the needle, but the strength potion coursing through his bloodstream was an agonizing process. As an average adult male, his physical score would be around 5 points. With an increase of +2, that's practically a 40% boost in his overall power. Since that's the case, he resolved to open the system store, his gaze locking in on the other physical enhancement potion listed there. Realizing the value of increased strength while holding another massive syringe, he might as well maximize the advantage it would give. After injecting another strength cheat code, his physical score had finally reached 8. He was practically 60% stronger than an average man, and he was eager to test this out. Seeing some loose iron bars strewn around the warehouse, the idea of testing struck Zhang Xiaoyang. He took one of the iron bars, one of those thick ones used for reinforcing buildings. Xiaoyang threw it up in the air and proceeded to kick it as fast and hard as he could. His attack bent the thick rod quite noticeably. The momentum carried on with the stick flying right into the nearby wall. Xiaoyang's kick was powerful enough to make a decent dent in a wall through the iron bar. With his current strength, his bare hands are practically weapons now. He would be comfortable going up against an early apocalypse right about now. As for the weapons he just procured, keeping them out in the open would be a stupid move, so it would be better to store them in the spatial ring for safety. Xiaoyang just pointed his magical ring at the contents of the truck, and they were promptly absorbed. If everything proceeds as he remembers, the day after tomorrow will mark the first day of the apocalypse. He doesn't have much time to do everything else that needs to be done. For some reason, he couldn't brush off the image of that old man pleading to buy his house, using a modest amount of hard-earned cash for his granddaughter. Zhang Xiaoyang had been through countless life-and-death scenarios and treachery in the first apocalypse, but ignoring the plight of the unfortunate had never been his style. Maybe he'll send some essential supplies to the old man. That's the least he could do to help him and his granddaughter's chances of survival. It's a repayment of sorts for supplying Xiaoyang's apocalypse funds. The very next day, Zhang Xiaoyang drove to a rundown apartment building in a shady part of a different city. Without GPS, finding this place would have been impossible, given how hidden and decrepit it was. Seeing as the old man had been renting in such a cheap and old place without an elevator, it was evident that he wasn't well off. Their unit was even on the top floor. Reaching the door, Xiaoyang casually knocked. He suddenly realized that he should take out the supplies from his storage ring, or he would have a hard time explaining where they came from. Activating its effects, boxes upon boxes of essential supplies stacked on top of one another filled the hallway. At that moment, the old man reached the door. He opened it and immediately assumed it was the landlord, promising to pay rent next week. When he got a good look at the young man, he realized it was Mr. Jiang. With him were the boxes crowding the hallway, stretching through the staircase, which confused the old man even more. Xiaoyang promised to explain the deal later. They needed to get these boxes inside before the neighbors saw them. After a few minutes of lifting, which was done mostly by Xiaoyang, They managed to get everything inside. The old man was impressed that the young man didn't even look tired. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang was just surveying the room and analyzing if it would be a suitable emergency shelter, and it was. The front door was solid enough. Next, he urged the old man to listen carefully to what he was about to say. He explained that the supplies should be used wisely, as they should last for about half a year starting tomorrow. Just as he was about to go into more detail, Xiaoyang was taken aback by a photo displayed in the room. The old man was still confused. In the photo was the proud old man and his beautiful granddaughter. Much to Xiaoyang's surprise, the girl in the photo was a close friend he had during the first apocalypse, Shanshan. He promptly asked the old man if the girl in the photo was named Meng Shanshan. This confused the old man even further, as he had never mentioned her name to the young man before. Xiaoyang's expression darkened, and he hurriedly asked the old man where the girl was. She was still at school while they were arranging the transfer paperwork. The young man could still remember when Shanshan expressed her regrets about dooming her grandpa in the early days of the first apocalypse. As far as he could remember, Shanshan's grandpa would end up risking everything to save her. The old man would bravely break into her zombie-infested school. In that doomed timeline, he would manage to save her, but would die in the process. Being a close aide in his previous life, Xiaoyang resolved to never let that kind of pain happen to Shanshan again. He turned to the old man and declared that the house wasn't for sale anymore. The innocent grandpa panicked, thinking Mr. Jiang was pulling out of the deal. But Xiaoyang gave him a tougher pill to swallow. The world would turn into a living hell tomorrow. The house and Shanshan's school wouldn't matter anymore. For now, they needed to pick her up and transfer her to a safer place. This sudden declaration only confused the old man even more. Xiaoyang was in such a rush that he failed to factor in the incredulity of the apocalypse. It was hard to explain what was about to happen to an old man. So, he used a more understandable term for an old head, urging the old man to imagine how tragic and terrifying living through a famine was. Sure, it sounded scary, but famines couldn't happen in times of peace, right? Realizing that no words could convince the old man to trust him, Jiang Xiaoyang took a show-don't-tell approach. He sucked all the supply boxes back into his storage ring in an instant. He even included everything else in the room. By the time he was done, the old man was looking at an empty, spacious room. There was no other word to describe it other than magic. Jiang Xiaoyang proclaimed that he had superpowers and could see into the future. The old man needed to listen to everything he said to survive and save Shanshan. Their next move was to take the girl out of that school. On the car ride to where Shanshan was, the old man's mouth still hung wide open, his eyes fixated on the unbelievable young man. To get there as fast as possible, Xiaoyang drove like a madman, as if traffic laws were merely suggestions. Running out of the vehicle, they needed to find Shanshan wherever she was. In front of one of the department buildings was a young woman surrounded by a few other students. It was none other than Shanshan. Right now, some stereotypical witch was slapping her across the face because some boy liked her. With defiant eyes, Shanshan insisted that she didn't even want to be with the freak, and she didn't like the attention from the creep. Another witch stepped in and kicked her in the stomach for daring to talk back. Two witches took turns beating her up out of jealousy over all the attention Shanshan was getting because of her beauty. The situation was rapidly accelerating, only to be interrupted by the voice of the old man after seeing his granddaughter in such a heartbreaking position. Those witches turned their attention to the grandpa running towards his precious granddaughter. He yelled at the unruly young women for what they were doing to Shanshan, telling them to let go of the girl. That's when some ugly thugs stood in his path, telling the old man to step back and let the girls settle their business without interruption, deliberately showing their blunt weapons and blades. The old man did not hesitate to charge in, even when threatened with knives, yelling at the boys for being mannerless bullies. One of the thugs raised his steel bat, aiming it at the old man's head. It would have been quite a severe ordeal had the bat hit, but Xiaoyang decided to step in on time, stopping the bully's attack. He looked at the young waste of space. It seemed like young guns were still learning to be thugs. The other two shifted their attention to Xiaoyang. They thought he was Shanshan's older brother or something. An easy target, nevertheless. The bully's hands holding the steel bat didn't budge no matter how he struggled, and then Xiaoyang made him eat a solid kick to the solar plexus. The poor thug flew into the air, looking like he had been launched by a cannon. Looking at the fate of the first thug, the other two hesitated for a moment. By the looks of it, Xiaoyang seemed trained in combat. Maybe if they went at him as a double team, they could sneak a hit in. But judging by the cold and calculating glare of Xiaoyang, that didn't seem to be the case. Two thugs, one at the front holding a knife and the other at the back holding a bat. This was the best plan two wannabe thugs could cook up. The first one to make a move was the one from the flank, doing a full bat swing. Sensing the incoming attack, Xiaoyang was easily dodged by swift ducking. His new body was proving useful already. After taking those potions and enhancing his physical abilities, his reaction speed was even heightened. He grabbed the thug who tried to bash him in the head, pulling him by the collar as if Xiaoyang were catching a badly behaved kid. With his newfound strength, slamming the bastard right into the cold, hard ground was easy peasy. One slam was all it took for the bully to pass out. The guy must have hit his head on the concrete or something. Taking the chance, the remaining bully rushed in with a knife in hand. Without even batting an eye, the zombie apocalypse veteran redirected the weapon and stared down the blonde bully with his unwavering eyes. Xiaoyang didn't even break eye contact while priming his leg for another kick. This time, he kicked the remaining thug on the side of the leg. The force was so powerful that it made the bully fold like an omelet. For additional damage, the fall eventually ended with Blondie's face hitting the floor quite hard. In just a few seconds, the wannabe thugs were dealt with appropriately. The only obstacles remaining in front of him were the catty witches aggravating Shanshan for no good reason. You see, after going through the first grueling apocalypse, Zhang Xiaoyang is now a proponent of equal rights, equal fights. So he smacked that bully witch across the face. She wasn't expecting it either. The strength behind that slap was quite serious. It made her shiver, and her cheek turn red. As for the other bully, since she liked pulling Shanshan's hair so much, Xiaoyang gave the witch a taste of her own medicine. He didn't let go no matter how much she pleaded. With a murderous gaze, he pulled out the knife he got from the blondie and placed it against the girl's neck. Scared of what he might do, the witch was frightened to tears. Every bystander in the area heard a crisp slash and an ear-piercing scream. Xiaoyang didn't even bat an eye. In the first apocalypse, he did a lot of things for the sake of survival, and those instincts have remained with him. The ladies watched in horror at the result of what he had just done. Miss Bully dropped to her knees, seemingly lifeless and powerless. Don't worry, our MC is not that brutal, at least not yet. He just gave the bully a little haircut and humiliated her in front of everyone. Still not learning her lesson, the witch cried out that she wouldn't let Xiaoyang get away after doing her dirty like this. He didn't pay any mind to her empty threats. While glaring down at her pathetic self, he sprinkled the locks of hair on top of her head for maximum disrespect. He did so while telling her that he did her a favor, as long hair would only be a burden in the near future. Everyone was confused by his cryptic words, but he assured them that having short hair might just save the bully's life in the coming days. Xiaoyang turned to Shanshan with close familiarity, telling her that they had to go now, even if she didn't know where. Nevertheless, the old man convinced his granddaughter to board Mr. Jiang's car immediately. In there, her grandpa told her that she wouldn't be coming to school anymore. With a crazy look in his eyes, the old man explained that a massive famine was coming, and survival would have to be their priority. Shanshan wasn't buying it though. She thought her grandpa just fell for one of those scam calls. Xiaoyang watched the two bicker as the young woman worried that her grandpa had just gotten conned for some cash. The young man was just glad to see Shanshan safe, promising to keep her safe in this new life. Seeing as grandpa's words had no effect, he butted in and confessed that the information about this alleged famine came from him. Come to think of it, she didn't even know who this guy was, driving them to God knows where. Zhang Xiaoyang properly introduced himself, letting Shanshan call him Brother Xiaoyang. She thanked him for standing up to the bastards at school, and he assured her that those guys wouldn't have many days left alive. Now, she was curious if there really was a famine coming so suddenly. He finally fessed up that he just made up the famine story to make it easier for the old man to understand. A famine in modern peaceful times would be borderline impossible. So, he cleared up that what's really coming in the next few days is the apocalypse, the end of modern civilization as they know it. Hearing that would make anyone feel crazy. It's a natural reaction to such a declaration. Looking at the clock, Xiaoyang reckoned that it should be about time to check the news and internet to see the initial signs of the end of times. Pulling her phone out and checking the news, a video of a man reciting some pretty ominous end-of-day stuff appeared front and center. It was a man being detained by authorities in a crowded train station. Some people said it was rabies, and the guy was biting other people. But the man seemed lucid enough to recite some grim stuff about a smog with a strange smell. In the video, the detainee resisted being held down hard enough to break free and bite more people like a dog. It was pretty much chaos from then on. As Xiaoyang stated and expected, the initial signs of the apocalypse were already in full swing. Tomorrow will mark the official first day of the apocalypse. A toxic smog will start to blanket several provinces, including Province B. All kinds of living beings will be affected by this unknown smog. It will come to a point where a significant portion of the population will mutate into mindless zombies roaming the streets, looking for their next prey. As for the other portion that survives the smog, they won't be spared by the cruelty of those zombies hungry for flesh. After dying an agonizing death, the victim will become one of them. Shanshan is part of the new generation, so she should have a general idea of what zombies are like. She does have some ideas based on films and pop culture in general, but it's hard to believe it is happening for real. But when the chaos officially kicks off tomorrow, the day after, or next week, everyone won't find the idea so unbelievable. Unfortunately, they were caught in traffic when time was of the essence to get back to headquarters. It was so bad that even the emergency lane was blocked and backed up. The old man was starting to freak out as Mr. Jiang just mentioned zombies, and now they're in a stationary position. But Xiaoyang assured him that they should be safe for now. But even if the zombies won't be able to take over everything for a few days, the possibility of a small outbreak nearby would not be impossible. While every car was bumper to bumper, a luxury car sped through the emergency lane, passing everyone. When the traffic moved a little bit, the luxury car took the opportunity to cut Xiaoyang. The bastard was driving so fast and recklessly that Xiaoyang nearly rammed into him had he not braked. He was pissed, and rightfully so. That guy had no concept of turn signals and just cut into the emergency lane like an idiot, endangering everyone. Feeling confrontational, the young man refused to swallow the disrespect he was handed. He didn't let the bastard enter his lane, blocking it off. Even after he deliberately showed that he wasn't letting the bastard in, the luxury car wasn't giving up. Everyone's stuck in the same traffic jam, and reckless drivers don't get a pass. The luxury car pulled up next to Xiaoyang's window and spouted some vile curses, looking like he was the one aggravated in this situation. The old man advised that they should just avoid trouble for now, as the reckless driver seemed wealthy and powerful. Xiaoyang didn't mind that though. If the bastard tried to step out and cause trouble, he wouldn't hesitate to paint the road with the rich man's blood. They were stuck in that traffic jam for almost an hour, but it fortunately cleared up. Looking at their rear, it seemed like the headaches had not stopped yet, as the luxury car from before was trying to cut in once again. It was deliberately chasing after them. Xiaoyang was really starting to get pissed off now. The rich brat just wouldn't let it go. Whoever that bastard was, he's surely an unhinged person who willingly put his life and vehicle on the line just to be obnoxious on the road. He was tailgating and deliberately taunting them. It's your textbook road rage enjoyer. The old man urged Mr. Jiang to just let it go and not engage any further. Well, the Jiang Xiaoyang of the past might have let this bastard slide, but the apocalypse is due tomorrow. There would be no need to tolerate scumbags like that rich brat anymore. So Xiaoyang played with the road rager for a little bit. He bet on the guy bitching out at the last second, and he came out on top. The rich brat nearly crashed on the hill nearby, and he had the gall to attribute it to the little punk from the traffic. The suited-up bastard immediately dialed traffic police to ask for surveillance footage. He wanted to track down Xiaoyang to show that the people at the top were not to be messed with. By the time the three reached the headquarters, it was already well into the night. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the old man looked at the compound with his mouth wide open in surprise at its scale. Shanshan commented that the whole place seemed a little too much. Xiaoyang told the two to get some rest starting tomorrow, and everything they believed would be turned upside down as the world entered hardcore mode. That's what he said. But he looked pretty chill and comfortable in front of his viewing deck with a coffee in hand first thing in the morning. Shanshan had just woken up and found Xiaoyang nearby. It had been so long since she had a great sleep, and not having morning classes was a liberating feeling. Since she was already up, this would be an excellent time to take her on a tour around the fortress. They fetched Grandpa, and Xiaoyang gave them a tour around the facilities, where all walls were made of some serious reinforced concrete. Each gate wouldn't cave without the use of heavy weaponry, as they were remote-controlled and made of 3-centimeter thick solid steel. Whether it was people or zombies, keeping anything out would be a cinch. He also reminded them that no one other than the three of them would be allowed inside the fortress without Xiaoyang's permission. Shanshan interpreted that as leaving other survivors who managed to reach this place to die outside with the undead. Xiaoyang did not answer outrightly. He just invited them to come to the next spot. He carefully explained that with the apocalypse underway, human nature would become even more unpredictable than it already was. The evil inside people's hearts would be magnified without laws. Having a big heart and compassion would only get them killed down the line. So he led the two to view a spot that he had constructed. It looked like a fenced apartment complex with multiple shipping containers strewn around. He instructed that in the event he wasn't around and survivors came seeking help, they could be housed in this buffer zone as temporary shelter. Without his explicit permission, the ban on other people from the main fortress still stood. The old man concurred. The next stop on the tour would be the food storage. He would also point out which areas of their supply place could be rationed out to other people. Entering the warehouse filled with stacks upon stacks of essential supplies, it seemed like an absurd sight. Xiaoyang turned around, looking at them with intent. He proceeded to activate the mind's eye to check their hostility status after showing them the goods. Fortunately, he saw happy faces on top of their heads. It should be safe to assume that this was a sign of trust. So, he continued with the next showcase from his storage ring, while explaining that weapons were the most important thing in this apocalypse. He handed Shanshan a crossbow and the old man a shotgun. He reminded them to ensure that these weapons remain under their control, never falling into someone else's hands. It was only common sense to do so. Weapon security was a must unless they wanted chaos. While in the middle of the tour, Xiaoyong received a notification regarding a new system task. After reuniting with Meng Shanshan, he was given another mission to reunite with another former comrade named Zhang Qi. This notification came as quite a shock to Xiaoyong. Looking at the city from the viewing deck, he saw an arrow indicating Zhang Qi's location. He was already planning to find his old friends, so this was a nice bonus. Before bolting off to take on the mission, he told the grandpa-granddaughter duo to remember the rules and never think of violating them. When asked where he was going, he entered his car and answered that he would be out to recruit and build up the team. The giant arrow indicating Zhang Qi's location seemed to be pointing at a KTV bar. Inside one of the rooms, a group of friends were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. The silver-haired Zhang Qi drunkenly stumbled out of the room with one of his boys to go to the restroom. After emptying their bladders, the two drunkenly stumbled out into the hallway. Being so inebriated, Zhang Qi accidentally bumped into a girl. It was a light bump, but the girl looked supremely irritated. Not thinking much of it, Zhang Qi immediately apologized. But the girl's escort did not take the whole thing well. Calling Zhang Qi a punk, he kicked the young man indiscriminately. Zhang Qi stumbled into a nearby wall, falling on his ass, and it looked pretty painful. His buddy ran to his side to check if he was okay. He certainly didn't look like it. Glass's buddy had some balls to stand up for his friend, yelling at the violent thug for behaving so aggressively. Not used to people talking back to him, especially in front of his girl, the thug was infuriated. He lifted Glass's buddy by the collar, and the bastard was quite strong. Seeing the situation escalating, Zhang Qi tried his best to get back up and admit that he was at fault, pleading for the thug not to hit his buddy. Fortunately, a KTV staff member was walking around nearby. He was lamenting getting over stomach flu and immediately catching a cold, but the commotion caught his attention. It seemed like fights were quite commonplace in this bar, as drunk people just couldn't keep their hands to themselves. The staffer decided to step in to try and break up the fight, asking both parties to calm down. When the thug turned around, he looked offended to be stopped. He took it as disrespect, as even the KTV's owner would not dare touch his clothes. The heroic staffer was now the target of the thug's anger, so he silently gestured for Zhang Qi and his buddy to hurry up and leave. Bastard thug demanded that the bar boss come out right away, or he would shut the place down. Mr. Staffer tried to de-escalate, but it seemed ineffective as the college boys ran away. Back in karaoke room 3090, the two barged in as if they were being chased by a wild animal. Their other friends were naturally curious as to what was happening and why they were in such a frantic rush. Well, they basically bumped into a drunk thug who threatened to beat them up really badly. They were lucky that one of the staff was quick-witted and kind enough to defuse the commotion. One of their friends stood up, telling them they should have put up a fight as their mechanical engineering class should never back down. He wanted to call other guys from their department to retaliate. Zhang Qi stopped the hothead from doing so, as acting tough and looking for trouble when they had less than a year until graduation would be a stupid move. They should just keep singing, dancing, and celebrating. They did just that. But the trouble continued looking for them in the form of the drunk thug with his whole group. It looked like they beat on the server to find room 3090. The boys were naturally surprised that a group of unknown tough guys had just charged inside. Drunk thug threw the server like a rag doll and pointed at Zhang Qi and his friends, telling his boys to grab everyone. The college boys did not dare resist for fear of escalating the violence even more, so they surrendered. Seeing the fate of the beaten server made them shiver. The tough guy of mechanical engineering taunted the thugs, daring them to let him make one phone call. Grabbing a whiskey bottle, drunk thug stopped the tough guy from talking. He did so by smashing the full bottle in his hand against the tough guy's head. Tough guy Chen Chong's blood and the whiskey mixed as it flowed down to the floor, much to Zhang Qi's worry. Outside the KTV bar, a familiar car just pulled up to the entrance. Zhang Xiaoyong came out of his car with a smile, excited at the thought of seeing one of his old buddies from the first apocalypse. He was amused by how in character, a KTV was for a college student version of Zhang Qi. He entered the premises, guided by the top-notch staff. Even when they faced the horrible end of the world for the first time around, Zhang Qi had always been the type of guy who still had the heart to sing.